What if I told you that the game you bet on last night was fixed, not by a single dude, but by a global syndicate tied to the mafia? A massive high-tech network operating in the shadows of the brightest spotlights. We are talking about players, families, and fortunes all corrupted. For us hope seekers, for the burnout warriors, we think we are fighting our own battles. But what happens when the very systems that we try to escape into, like sports, are rigged? Too. We are going to be diving deep today. We're going to be pulling back the curtain on the recently uncovered NBA linked gambling scandal and reveal what it takes to expose that kind of darkness. We're going to be talking to a digital forensics, organized crime, and what it means for the integrity of everything that we trust. We're going to be talking about it. So it's time to stop fighting chaos and start transforming it. Welcome to the Transform You Live show. I'm your host, as always, Marcus Hart, and I am faith-filled and fired up. Man, I got to tell you, I'm so humbled to have an absolute expert with us today. He is on the front lines helping the iGaming industry shut down fraud and keep the game honest. We're going to be walking in today the brilliant, he goes by the name of HB. He'll tell you his full name on the other side. But let's welcome him to the show.
Welcome to the Transform You Live show.
And one. Okay, welcome to the show, HB. Could you do us a favor by telling us your name? HB is pretty cool. I love the use of the initials, but for my audience who are getting to know you for the first time, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Marcus. It's a pleasure to join you. Yeah, my name is Hasnan Bajwa. I'm based out of Austin, Texas, and work for Sion on advanced fraud prevention products and anti-money laundering capabilities. But yeah, I've been based here in Austin for a number of years, and everyone calls me HB.
Excellent. So let's cut right to the core of this. When we hear mafia and sports betting, we usually think about the old school stuff, a guy in a smoke-filled room. But this is different. It's high tech. It's your lane. So from your vantage point, when law enforcement dives into an investigation like this, what are the key digital artifacts, the breadcrumbs, the secret handshake that they are primarily hunting for to piece this together?
Yeah, so when you look at the influence of some of these mob activities, the hybrid of legalization of sports betting really changes the landscape quite a bit. Um, Traditionally, the amount of data that was available to folks was somewhat limited. Nowadays, in a digital first world, it's often easy to collect all of the artifacts and keep track of all of the transactions. And regardless of whether the platforms involved are taking a look at bet by bet activity, they are definitely keeping track of it. They're keeping track of every deposit and withdrawal from accounts. And there's an enormous amount of activity and energy applied since the legalization to comply with regulatory requirements. Those vary by states, they vary by country, they can vary by type of game operation. And what we see is that this huge digital footprint is being created, and people are maybe sometimes aware of parts of it, but not aware of the entire thing. From a law enforcement standpoint, I think it gives a lot of visibility. Like the first thing is that you need a hint of what's happening and any kind of like suspicious behavior. A lot of those things are coming out as people are evolving the anti-money laundering space. So anti-money laundering looks at inter-platform and intra-platform transactions. So what we see is that these things are logged and there's requirements to track suspicious activities and cash transaction activities. What counts as a suspicious activity can be quite varied and is kind of a moving target. There's usually some thresholds involved, and there's a lot of evaluation of structuring. Like, are people passing the same money between themselves over and over? And there are just many different levels. Like, there are solutions that exist inside the game boundary, like within the play dynamics. Then there's the solutions that sit above the play dynamics. All of these are basically adopting write once, read many patterns for audit logs. So while they're not using distributed ledgers in the same like fashion that we talk about in Bitcoin, the technology of using an immutable like logging infrastructure is present. And with the cost of storage where it's at, there's just an enormous amount of information. If the initial tracking doesn't detect it, then obviously when a tip is received or other kinds of information, you're no longer limited to having like all of your visibility only be 24 hours long or 7 days long. A lot of these organizations are keeping all of their logs for a year, sometimes 3 years, and sometimes even 7 or 8 years.
That's raw truth and facts right there, that you just spoke to. The systems are complex, but the data doesn't lie. Well, that's something that I got out of what you just said. Now I want to talk about speed, though. However, when we're dealing with things like match fixing or collusion, the timing is everything. How crucial are volatile data that is that stuff that disappears fast, like system memory. You talked about long-term memory a little bit, and the time steps. When reconstructing the exact moment a line was crossed, and let's be honest and let's be real. How much of a nightmare is in the end-to-end encryption for the folks trying to crack these cases? That's really a real question most of my audience want to know.
Yeah, so I think end-to-end encryption definitely makes things more difficult. The reality is that using out-of-band, unmonitored channels is going to be central to a lot of these activities, but law enforcement has the resources, especially at scale, to do things that no one else can. So, you know, for an ordinary adversary in a targeted scenario, the types of privilege escalation attacks and compromises that are necessary to be successful in overcoming iOS or Android security, they're cost prohibitive, being in the $500,000 to $3 million a compromise kind of range. That's not within the territory of individual actors, but it's very viable for government grade actors. And so to assume that government grade actors don't have access to information, especially in user space applications, regardless of their security complexity, is kind of difficult to imagine. I think end to end encryption creates a lot of confidence that ordinary low hanging fruit type of compromise isn't possible. But for a determined and well funded adversary, it's very much viable to get through most levels of end to end encryption. Now, in fact, none of these are typically brute force attacks. You can go back to the original RSA type of key encryptions. The asymmetric key encryption, since its invention, has largely been immune to brute force attacks. So, the reality is that we're always looking at side channel attacks, but the creativity of the attacker when it's a nation state type of entity that's or like law enforcement entity, that's a completely different scenario than conventional adversaries.
Yeah, kind of related to that along them lines is, when I was on the wrong side of the tracks in my life, and one of the things that I always try to rely on was encrypted text. So it sounds a little bit like that in the sense, about how it's sometimes it can be very difficult to read one's partner's encrypted text. But let's pivot to the money part of this. This is where a lot of our folks are who are dealing with financial burdens and debt feel that gut punch. You talked about cryptocurrency earlier. Now that illegal betting often flows through that, paper trail is digital, fast, and often anonymous. What specific digital forensic techniques are being deployed to de-anonymize these transactions and actually tie them to those digital audits back to a known crime syndicate or a specific individual?
Sure. So there's a lot of intentional and unintentional technology that's present in these kinds of scenarios. So, from an intentional standpoint, the platforms themselves have a huge incentive to limit non human identities, bot actors. You don't want automated players engaging in games of skill, playing time arbitrage games on small events and the various kinds of parlay fever that gets created in these like modern platforms.
Yeah.
So I think what you've got is that kind of like first layer of web defense, bot prevention. Those things are generally not sophisticated enough to overcome fraud browsers, undetectable browsers. There's an entire like cottage industry of dedicated commercial solutions that make it possible for automated or scripted or bot like actors to engage with platforms. And so there's layering of controls and visibility that occur at each of those levels. There's also a lot of baselining of the device type. So a fundamental part of bot detection and defense is trying to fingerprint and understand unique devices. In general, all of these platforms that people engage in are strongly fingerprinting the location of the device. So trying to assess whether or not geographically the user is permitted to engage in the gaming operations that they're engaging in. In order to do that, there are multiple layers of regulatory and certified locationing technologies that need to be present. Those things will create a fingerprint. They'll also create a location identity. So even as you're trying to hide that, these things are typically immune to a lot of the spoofing or emulation activity of location.
Yeah.
So I think that creates a barrier. Then there's also like additional layers of unique device identifiers that can be created based on, some combination of screen resolution or what we call canvas behavior, like, how big is the screen? What's its behavior with certain types of drawing patterns? We look at commonly paired signals that are spoofed and try to create like special views to characterize like those patterns of people trying to bypass detection. All of these things create a trail, a digital trail that you can use to uniquely characterize the device, and it really addresses the repudiation challenge that law enforcement has. Like, the best defense is typically like, I didn't do it, show that I did it. Like, somebody messed with the log, somebody changed the thing. And so,
Mhm.
like, non repudiation is the goal of these types of investigations, that you want to be able to get to a point that
Yeah.
where the beyond a doubt the device and the person involved are in fact the device and person, and being able to use their behavioral patterns and trails and tracking is really powerful. And in the case of law enforcement, they're not just limited to constructive fraud prevention and location detection and authentication solutions. They can also use third party signals like the marketing data or subpoenaable location data that mobile operators or internet service providers will provide. And so that's sort of the challenge, is that there's an ever increasing sort of hierarchy of visibility that is available. And a lot of the adversarial behavior is understanding that this creates a need to move towards more micro event manipulation. So if you look at a lot of these like discussions, the press releases around this have been startling in the smallness of some of the claims being made in terms of like what was being paid and what was actually being done. I think that kind of micro event behavior people were hoping would slip under the radar, but it's probably indicative of a lot more micro event behavior that they weren't able to fully assess and assure. And so, like, I think as these cases progress, we'll hear a lot more, and maybe in the process of going through this, we'll see them reveal even more of this kind of like micro event behavior, that when people realized that big sort of organized fraud was no longer like viable, shifting to these like more aggressive, smaller transaction sizes that might slip through. The reality is that between human intelligence and tipsters and also the machine intelligence continuing to evolve,
Yeah.
it's going to be really hard to hide anomalous patterns. Like, anomaly detection is getting much better, and AI is helping us with the assessment. So, where you need kind of non deterministic human like assessment of relevance,
Yeah.
more specialized kind of well-trained investigators and operators can simply tell their own agent, like, hey, I want you to look at every pattern that has this in it. And so the fact that sophisticated intelligence experts, investigation experts will be able to interact with the platform at a more programmatic and deeper level, I think that's the real power that we're going to see out of the AI revolution here.
That's real sobering to know, though, and it feels like a cat and mouse game on a global scale nowadays. So we seen leagues like the NBA start their own investigations. What, in your professional experience, is the primary difference between a league's internal integrity investigation, the we need to clean our own house approach, and a heavy-hitting federal investigation like the FBI's? What differentiates the scope, the resources, and the evidence that they actually can bring to court?
This is one of those things where reputation matters a great deal to organizations of that size, right? Like from a reputational perspective, I think there's always a desire to detect this and be proactive. Like no one wants the kind of publicity that the NBA has experienced since their ref scandals 20 years ago. They want to be able to put people at ease that there's integrity in sport, and there are a lot of advocates for integrity in sport, and people were always worried that gambling would create challenges globally. Whenever you look at markets that allow like broad gambling, there's a lot of match fixing. The goal would be that, with people earning tens of millions of dollars, with minimum salaries where they're at, you would hope that these like 50,000 type of transactions and things wouldn't be a problem. But this is the issue is that there's no accounting for human greed or human focus on getting an edge. People do weird things. People do stuff that makes no sense. And the reality is that the NBA's programs probably weren't up to snuff compared to a money laundering regulator or a banking regulator or anyone who's doing like structured investigations of mule transactions, other like suspicious transactions, people who work in large scale structured transaction analysis and evaluation. They're able to find these patterns. Now, yeah, like obviously I think that this will result in a new level of reckoning, much like world sports had to deal with doping scandals, implementing passports and whatnot, like track like blood markers and stuff. I can imagine some desire to do things like that, but like, will they ever convince NBA players and their entourages to be able to put managed device technologies and like endpoint detection, like surveillance tools on it? I doubt it. So like it's always a bit of a challenge. I think what's going to end up happening is that they will have to look at like high-end trading environments and maybe
Yeah.
borrow techniques from high-end trading. So like obviously insider trading, other kinds of like bad behavior from inside actors has been a challenge in those like highly moneyed fields for many years.
Right.
And I think in those spaces, people have found the right balance of privacy protection tools and surveillance capability to be able to avoid these kinds of embarrassing incidents for their organizations. I think the NBA and others will have to consider the same level of intelligence and surveillance and depth of investigation.
So, HB, and very good on that. I like the way you really cover that. I want to talk evolution. You know, we've seen sports betting legalized in state after state. Has this legalization wave actually changed the tactics and the role of organized crime groups like the mafia? Are they cleaning up their act, or is they just finding a new, slicker way to exploit the legal system?
I think when you look at the role of hybridization of legal landscape, it's very challenging. It substantially increases the amount of money in the system, and the activities of the actors can transition to being more data informed or even data driven. That, the mobsters almost ran like the university of like, gambling for many, many years. And now, like, they're more like a graduate researcher. And so like they sit with some advanced and advantageous understanding of like human behavior, things that are easily detected, things that might not be so easily detected, things that may slip, things that may fit into a noise floor. And I think the challenge now is just going to be that these incentivized actors who previously had enormous stakes still have substantial stakes, and they now have tools that, with the right expertise, they can avail at a scale that's beyond like an ordinary like bad actor, like the ability to be organized in your crime. It's a powerful capability if you need some basic operational infrastructure to play the game at like a modern AI level. And so I think they won't be as sophisticated as nation state type of entities trying to engage in bad behavior, but they do present like a unique risk in terms of being local and being able to corrupt inside organizations and having substantial enough assets and coercion techniques that they can continue having a huge impact. So I think they're they were once a big fish in a small pond. Now they're still a pretty big fish, but just in an ocean or like, sort of an
Yes.
enormous body of water now.
Yeah, I totally get that. And my audience, the urban hustlers, the depleted people of faith who are trying to find some help, they understand the hustle. They understand financial struggle. So when we talk about money laundering, what are the common methods outside of direct illegal bets that these groups usually scrub and launder illicit profits through both the legal and the black market betting operations? And most importantly, what are the financial buying spots?
Yeah, so there's an enormous amount of sort of micro betting activity that goes on, a lot of reducing the surface of having more mule accounts, having more like entities that are kind of controlled by a central skilled expert. And so I think you kind of see that. You also see a huge amount of layering that's designed to like obscure money flows. The more complex the betting landscape gets, the more you have options to not just go to like a conventional sports book, but also go to like a prop bet platform or like, kind of a like one of these like proprietary trading kind of solutions where they've financialized gambling, like the Kalshis of the world.
Mhm.
It's like a powerful kind of like environment with lots of options for this kind of like layering and money flow. And then I think there's just the classic third tier, which is kind of addressing the core need to launder ill-gotten gains, right? Like the more environments that these exist in, there's more desire to make it clean. And I think what's tricky here is that vulnerable people who are subject and vulnerable to like blackmail and like other kinds of abuse, it's easy for them to think that they're engaging in one type of behavior and actually engage in another. So I think people who are being approached to be like mules, like for purposes of like, supposedly a skilled bettor being able to access like a platform that they've been banned from, it's very
Mhm.
possible that what they think is one thing is something very different, that like it's not really about the betting, it's really about the cleansing of the money flow. And so people just have to be really careful as they're kind of approaching these things and realize that there's many different ways for bad actors to exploit these systems, and they just need to stay safe and be very skeptical.
Yeah. So this next one's gonna hit home for every fan out there. It takes an insider to truly rig a system. How does these organized groups typically manage to establish and maintain relationships with the insiders, the players, the staff, and the folks with non-public information? Is it pure coercion? You know, you mentioned it, or is it a calculated game of exploiting someone's personal chaos or financial weakness? And that vulnerability, by the way, that's where the grit usually meets the grind.
Yeah, I think it's very tricky, right? Like these people are sophisticated actors. They understand the uniqueness of proximity to extreme wealth, like having ordinary people around extraordinary wealthy people. In Silicon Valley, you're often exposed to like, people with hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars. sitting next to sort of the workaday engineer. And it's an interesting thing to see, right? Like, it's one thing to have your coworker take off for the weekend and do something similar to what you're doing. It's an entirely different thing to have them fly their race car to Germany for a race or something like that, right? And I think that this division, the level of division that exists between these support staff, these informed and knowledgeable actors, it's huge, and we're not very good at tracking it. So, like, if you look at sports related person tracking, there's often efforts to ensure that sport is fair. And so, like, there are a lot of exclusion lists that are created that prevent people who own sports clubs or are currently employed by sports clubs or engage in refereeing, to prohibit them from being able to play in these platforms. That doesn't prevent someone from being like one link removed and saying like, hey, you have this knowledge, I have a clean persona that you can use. It feels like easy money. It feels like an easy, like, victimless crime. And if you get away with it, maybe it is. But the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of investment in this area when you look at where AI is evolving from a business case perspective. People should know that the fraud prevention, anomaly detection spaces are some of the most lucrative in terms of dollar amount for enterprises. So that means that the speed at which that detection is improving, the speed at which they're locking in on this kind of like activity is extremely high, and people should be very cautious when they're faced with too good to be true scenarios, because you know one person's extraordinary good fortune doesn't entitle you to some percentage of it. So, like, just being in proximity to it, we all have to just spend more time. Like, the more the world becomes segmented and separated in terms of those of us who work and those of us who don't, who may choose to work or sometimes work, it's important to just keep perspective and just remember that, like, we want to live true to our beliefs, and we want to live true to what's important to us. And I think the number of reasons that someone engages in these things is now too numerous to be supported by any of the conventional sort of trust and fraud triad type of tropes that used to exist over the years. Like, people do it for personal gain, people do it for, like, emotional value. All of that stuff I think is irrelevant, because if you were to try and just ask like a modern LLM, ask ChatGPT, like, what are the reasons, I think it could probably enumerate 1,000 that are totally like reasonable and understandable.
Well, for sake of time, and we are definitely rallying towards the closing here. And man, I can't thank you enough for like all of that you have provided so far today. So, if we wanted to put a number on the darkness, right? What is your realistic estimate of like the current financial volume of the black market sports betting industry in the U.S., and how much of that is actively bleeding into the regulated legal market?
I haven't looked at these numbers in a while, but I think in general, people estimate that black market gambling is like 50 to 100 billion, and legal gambling is like a 150 billion ish market. I think people were talking about it a lot when the numbers started to cross.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that black market gambling still continues and is fast growing is a reflection of the fact that legalization opens more people up to awareness, and there is some elasticity in demand. I think this is one of those things where I'm not qualified to comment on addiction and morality of these kinds of things, but I can definitely understand those people who have real concerns about the risks that society exposes itself to when these things are broadly proliferated. I think being in this like gray area is particularly difficult. I think we will benefit as a society if we had one or the other, right? Like going
Right.
entirely black market has its value, and then going entirely legal has its value. And so I think as long as we're stuck in this middle space, it's going to be dangerous, and it's going to be problematic for society. And we're going to keep seeing stuff that's going to take our breath away and leave our mouths gaping when we read about it in the news.
That's for sure. That is for sure. So let's wrap this up with a look ahead. You know, if you had one shot to talk to the regulators, what is the single biggest regulatory gap or failure that this NBA link case exposed?
I think self-reporting and surveillance is really important. I think organizations need to think about what institutional programs they have in place. If you look at the biggest lessons that we've learned from insider trading prevention, it's that overzealous regulators are actually a good thing. So like I say this like risking the wrath of my colleagues, but like overzealous regulators encourage continuous evolution. And I think in this environment, what probably happened is that the detection and the visibility probably became stale. Like if you're still using the same playbook and practices that were in place 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you're just not keeping up with the modern landscape. And I think that's the challenge, is that, like, every time a state legalizes gambling, every time a new type of gambling platform is introduced, every time like a prediction market becomes something different, all of the sort of Neapolitan flavors of gambling and real money gaming, you have to look at them in whole and ensure that your compliance programs are keeping up. And I think this is probably a wake up call to everyone to revisit their compliance programs. Most people review them once a year statutorily, that, like, they'll have like a security review or some type of business continuity exercise, and it requires review of all like policies and practices. This is one where people will have to start thinking, like, is my policy really up to date? Am I doing the right amount of work trying to detect this proactively? Because I think a lot of these things, like, I mean, obviously we only read the press releases and reports, but like, it seems like some of these patterns were detectable, and some of these like capabilities could have been surveilled. I think the other thing is that dark web surveillance for organizations will have to increase and improve.
Yeah.
When people are engaging in these kinds of behaviors and there's collusion and collective activity, there's often some stream of information that could prove useful. Sometimes it's not in the most obvious places. So I think good guys will have to be in the places that bad guys are in order to properly protect themselves. And that's a deeper level of engagement than most organizations engage in. But I think for like high risk organizations like sports monopolies and sports teams, it's going to be critical.
Well, HB, I have stolen you from your family, and we want to definitely give you that time back to your family. And man, I can't stress it enough. This has been an absolute masterclass in separating the truth from the chaos. You are truly a gold mine in this industry. Very, very, very much a national treasure. So
It's
yeah.
been a real pleasure, Marcus. I
Oh
can't tell
yeah,
you how much I
absolutely.
enjoyed this conversation. It's really
Yeah.
great to hear someone who's so engaged and thoughtful. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for pulling back the curtain on this darkness. So, if someone in the iGaming or financial world needs to get smarter about fraud and wants to tap into your expertise, where is the best place for them to connect with you or your team?
Yeah, so people can reach me on LinkedIn. They can reach me on any social media platform. I usually go by HB512 on those things, trying to
So,
keep it simple for folks. But yeah, on LinkedIn is easy. The other thing is please reach out to us on our website, sion.io. We try to maintain a huge set of thought leadership work. We're really focused on trying to be a transparent vendor. So, like, we want to educate the market. Our goal is to support making the world safer and free of fraud and fraud related losses.
excellent. We got to make sure we do have those resources that you mentioned, LinkedIn and also your website to see on in our resources part of our description of this particular episode. So, brother, God bless you and thank you for your time today.
It's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate all of your time.
Excellent. So, until next time, folks, let's keep transforming.
Thanks.
Whoa, whoa, and more whoa. That was a gritty episode. Did you hear that? The scale of that corruption is absolutely mind blowing. And what's the lesson for us in all of this? The systems we trust, whether it be sports or our very own financial stability or our mental health, they are constantly under attack, folks. Just like those crime bosses who exploit vulnerability, so does burnout, so does anxiety, and so does self-doubt. You know that feeling when you're unknown or feeling very unknown? When you are working your tail off, but feel like nobody sees the value you bring. Listen, you deserve to be heard. You deserve to be seen as the authority that you are. That's why I created the perfect entry point into my ecosystem. It's called the Authority Launchpad. It's a high impact, fixed scope project where we work together to take you from the unknown to unforgettable in just one move. This isn't just coaching. This isn't just about equipping you with the authority and the voice you need to stop fighting chaos, but it's more so about transforming lives and how you can transform your very own. So we give you all of that I mentioned above, but it's really about transforming lives. So stop spinning your wheels. Go over right now to marcus-hart.com and check out the Authority Launchpad. Let's get you the massive win that you need. Go now, inspire, ignite, transform. Many blessings, peace, and lots of love. And we are out.
Transform You Radio. You are now tuned in to Transform You Radio. You hear me? Check. I stand for what you stand for. I'm at your door like the landlord. I can see the future, yeah, I fast forward. I get on the mic and I transform. Follow me, I'm in rare form. Follow me on this world tour. The asteroid that you can't avoid. Small changes make impact. I ran for it, I stand for it, I'm not sitting back. You can leave the rat race or you can leave the trap. Come with me, let's rap. Take a trip and we pack. And we'll be right back. Yeah, come with me, let's rap. Take a trip and we back. And we'll be right back. Yeah, I stand for what you stand for. Hey, I get on the mic and I transform. Follow me on this world tour. The asteroid that you can't avoid.
Follow me.